Hey everyone, Gary Suderman here with the Script Lab, here with Steve James, the director of Life Itself, the biographical documentary about Roger Ebert. So Steve, as we were just discussing, I absolutely loved this documentary. It's going to go in my all-time favorites, just because it is the perfect combination of Roger Ebert meant so much to so many people, myself included, and for those who love cinema and love the expression of film and believe that it should be for everyone, Roger was our hero. And you did a phenomenal job in portraying the entire scope of the man. You know, warts and all, as you guys were saying at your Q&A yesterday. So my first question to you is, what was the initial spark that drew you to proposing this documentary to Roger? Because it seems like you guys went way back from Hoop Dreams at Sundance in the early 90s. How did you first approach Roger with this idea?
Well, really, the idea came from Steve Zaillian, the screenwriter. He read Roger's memoir, loved it, and thought, gee, this would make a great documentary. And Steve is a total documentary lover, and I think he likes my work. And so he and his partner, Garrett, in his company, approached me and said, would you be interested in doing a biography of Roger Ebert based on his memoir? And I hadn't read it. I went and read the memoir, and I was just blown away. And the thing that blew me away, I mean, I learned so much about every aspect of his life, but I kind of went in knowing his significance as a critic, because I read him and I watched the show, and what I didn't know was how rich and amazing his life had been outside of the movie theater. And that ultimately was why I wanted to tell this story. Because if it had just been about Roger the movie critic and his importance, that doesn't sound like a film to me. A guy whose life was as rich and full of adventure and growth that Roger went through, that's a movie. And that's the kind of movie he would have loved. Mm-hmm. And I mean, of course, the really sad thing, as Chaz said last night at the screening, the real sad thing is that Roger wasn't with us last night to watch the movie.
Well, speaking of showing the other sides of Ebert, we get some very surprising revelations. His fascination with death and even macabre mortality. The fact that he loved those final pages of The Great Gatsby in that excerpt. Even his time as an editor of the university newspaper, and gosh, that article you quoted about the blood is on all of our hands. Yeah, so it made me realize he could have gone into anything. He didn't necessarily have to become this incredible film critic.
He fell into movie criticism. He loved movies. He was an avid movie goer in college and before, but he fell into that. He actually aspired initially to be a columnist. Be a newspaperman, earn his stripes, and then graduate to being a columnist. And you can see he had the chops for it, even at a young age. And I think that's one thing that was really kind of great about Roger's third act, when he could no longer speak, when much of his writing was in the internet, blogging as well as reviewing. He then allowed himself more of that freedom to sort of spread his wings and really become a columnist, not just a movie critic. Right.
Yeah, and it was really another example of him embracing the newest technology and the newest mediums of expression.
Yeah. Yeah, he kind of reinvented the whole idea of film criticism with Gene Siskel, and brought the idea of film criticism to the masses, and this idea that you don't just kind of walk out of a movie like many of us would and did before that show and just kind of say, yeah, I liked it, or I didn't like it. You actually engage in discussion, and he and Gene made that a broader phenomena. And then when he went to the internet, he did it again. He kind of reinvented the whole notion of criticism on the internet and blogging and communication and connection to people. As A.O. Scott says in the film, the seeds of what he did in his broad reach on the internet was born on that show, and then he extended it into this other sphere.
Yeah. And you include a lot of priceless anecdotes about the conflict, brotherly or more incisive, between Siskel and Ebert at times, and those outtakes when they're recording the beginning of sneak preview. Were there other instances of just little funny things like that, but that maybe were too long for the film that ended up on their cutting room floor?
Well, yeah, there's this great story. It's just how many of them can you put in there? I put as many of that. I loved all that stuff. Right. So, but there's this great story about Gene being underneath the coffee table or the conference room table taking a nap one day when Roger came in, didn't know he was there, and picked up the phone and called and was confirming an interview that he had with a star in L.A., and then hung up the phone, and Gene got up, pushed the redial button to figure out who he'd called, figured out who he was going to interview, and then scooped him. Wow. Another scooping story.
Right.
I mean, there was tons of stories like that, stolen cabs, stealing each other's cabs in New York. I mean,
And from Siskel's 8-month pregnant wife and all this,
And that, frankly, that was probably payback. Because, honestly, because Roger was steamed once about how Gene, that they both came out, they had to go separate places in New York, and the cab was for Roger, and Gene just took it, and he was so angry at him.
Right.
I wouldn't doubt that was payback.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Right. Well, one last question. So, given that the film is, the title. Life itself embodies what this film is, and it's very much a very mature documentary. Did you feel that allowing yourself to tell Roger's story has that kind of put your own life in perspective? And
he was so full of wisdom, and this is not in the film, but Ramin Barani told us that at one point, when he was having sort of a problem with a girlfriend, right? He reached out to Roger and asked his advice. And Roger was the kind of guy that could give you that kind of advice because he had lived life to the fullest himself, right? And so reading about Roger, learning about Roger through all the people, and there's so much wisdom in the way he conducted his life, and humility, which I think I treasure. And then to see him in those last 4 months, he was dying, but to see that he was still Roger Ebert, he was still cracking jokes, he was still stubbornly doing what he wanted to do, he was still had that will to live and that desire to keep working. I mean, that's truly inspiring to me.